Episode 50 of the Vincast is only 2 episodes away, and if you haven't already, or even if you have gotten in touch with me, please do so again about your interest in being a part of the 50th episode. Basically, guys, this is an opportunity for listeners to the podcast to dial in via Skype and chat with me, the Intrepid Wino, also known as James Scaresbrook, and share their impressions of the podcast, share their stories about wine, ask me questions about wine or about myself, and get interactive. It's always great to hear from you, whether it's online, on social media, through the website, or even in real life. I love meeting people who have listened to the podcast and hearing which episodes they've enjoyed. So this is a great opportunity for you to be on the episode itself and be able to hear yourself basically forever, for posterity, because it is digital. It's not a broadcast, it's a podcast. So do get in touch with me at thevincast@gmail.com, or you can do so through intrepidwino.com, or even via social media, intrepidwino on Twitter, or the Vincast on Twitter as well. But if you don't do so quickly, then you'll miss your opportunity to be part of such a fantastic episode. Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, also known as the Intrepid Wino, and as you just heard me say, we are very close to episode 50. Very excited about that. I can't believe that we've got to that point. We've had some really fantastic guests. If you haven't listened to many episodes before, if you're a new listener, I strongly urge you to go back and listen to some of the episodes, or listen to all of them if you have time. It's always fun to hear from people how they're listening to the podcast, whether it's on public transport or in the car or whilst they're at work. One of my former guests, in fact, surprised me, telling me that he listened to basically every episode, and he does so in the winery. So shout out to Brad Hickey, who I think was over in Melbourne just last week. Now, as I mentioned, 50th episode, I'm going to put in a few changes to the podcast, which I'm really excited about. I did mention on a previous episode that I was really keen for people to help me out via designing logos, or obviously just putting the word out, sharing the podcast online or in real life. And I also asked if anyone wanted to help me out by perhaps writing some music that I could use as the theme music for the podcast. And in fact, a two-time guest, Daniel Honan, was very gracious in putting together some music for me, which I will actually be debuting on episode 50. So I'm really excited about that. It's a really great piece of music, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think of it. Some of the other changes I'm going to be making, hopefully, from episode 50, is I'm actually going to be answering questions. So if you guys want to send me a question via email or on social media or through the website, and I will try and answer those questions to the best of my ability. And I'm also going to be starting to ask you a question. So every episode I'm going to ask you a question. And again, I would love to hear your answers. If you want to do that, just listen out, because I'll be doing those. I'll be answering the questions at the start of the episode and asking questions at the end. So make sure to listen all the way through. So this week's episode kind of follows on from what we were talking about last week with Damien Wilson about wine marketing. Now, of course, Damien is a wine marketing professor. He teaches wine marketing and wine business. But for this week's episode, I've got Kathy Lane, who is the driving force and owner of Fireworks PR. So we're going to talk about wine public relations and how it actually does help the wine industry in terms of communicating and connecting with an audience and eventually the end consumer. So she came on and was talking about her background, how she actually ended up working in that particular field. And she talked about how important it is for wine public relations in this very competitive and complicated market. So I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please do get in contact with Kathy and myself, but I will see you on the other side. Kathy, it is lovely to have you here in the studio for a change on the Vincast. Thank you very much for making time to be here.
Thank you very much, James. I'm very proud to be here.
Tell me, Kathy, how long have you been interested in wine? When was the first interaction you had that kind of made you kind of notice something about it?
Okay, well, my father was a collector of wine, so I've always been around wine, even as a kid, and we used to do all the, the Mornington Peninsula grape grazing and up to the Yarra Valley, etc., etc. When I first started working in wine, though, was when I actually travelled overseas, and I went away for an extended period of time travelling through Europe, etc., etc. Ended up back in London and decided I didn't really want to come home, and got my first job in hospitality, which was working in a restaurant, running a restaurant in Chelsea Harbour and then in the West End. And that's where I really developed my love of wine, and I was working
It sounds like you had a very kind of young Australian rite of passage sort of thing, travelling through Europe,
absolutely.
Getting to London, I don't want to go home, hospitality.
Absolutely. And, Australians in the UK particularly have a great reputation for being, hard workers and having a good work ethic and having fun. So that was absolutely the perfect environment for me. And the restaurant that I ran actually was owned by a couple of members of the royal family. So that was...
Really?
Yeah, that was pretty wacky too. On my first night, I met Princess Diana. So that was just wild.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really cool. So I stayed in London for about 4 years running the restaurant. They sponsored me, etc., etc. Then that ran out and I had to come home. Mm-hmm. So then I worked in restaurants here, and then I ended up working for a broad range wholesaler at the time called Dilataire, which was run by Peter Marr, who lots of people know in this industry. And from there I went and worked with Tucker Seabrook, and I was with Tucker Seabrook for 6.5 years, some in Melbourne, some in Sydney.
What were you doing at Tucker Seabrook?
Well, I started off doing some sales supervising stuff in the Victorian office, and then I ended up in Sydney working directly with Rob and Judy Hurst, running the National Advertising Communications Department, which was actually my background. I studied advertising and PR at RMIT and worked for a long time in the advertising industry. So I'd kind of come full circle,
sure,
which was great. And so
the Tucker Seabrook is a distributor and importer, or they were?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were actually Australian.
It's pretty amazing that we're talking about a time when importer distributors actually had an advertising budget.
Well, indeed, and we don't
really see that much.
No,
anymore.
well, we used to have an A&P fund. So of every sale that went through, there was some money that was siphoned off into an A&P fund, which funded activity. And what has happened, obviously, over time in the industry is that sort of middle layer of management and marketing has really been eroded, and that responsibility has kind of gone back to the wineries themselves to put on their own people. And now distributors are really just doing that. They're just sales and distribution. Yeah.
Well, I know that, in my experience working for Chandon, I guess it was a little bit different because, Malt Hennessy have its own distribution, but there was still the same kind of complexities where the winery was expected to have a budget set aside for, advertising, promotion and brand building and that kind of thing. And then Malt Hennessy would run sort of trade activities in an effort to communicate with the market, I guess. But, sort of the broad range type stuff, that was from the winery.
Yeah. Well, this is quite a long time ago, though. I've had my own business now for nearly 12 years. So, we're talking a little way back. But yeah, obviously that's exactly how the industry has evolved, that responsibility for marketing and funds and brand development has really been pushed back to the brand owner. And the distributors do just that, distribute and sell. That's kind of it.
So what was the nature of sort of advertising, promotion, public relations back in that kind of period of time?
Well, it was a heyday. I was very lucky to work with Tucker Seabrook. At that time, they were Australia's oldest, family-owned wine distribution business. They started in 1838, which was pretty wacky.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. So there was a lot of history and a very smart portfolio. We were working with Champagne Bollinger and Grand Marnier and Cape Mentel and Henschke and Bannockburn and, just amazing brands to work with. Some
historic brands too.
Absolutely. Jabelet and just fantastic brands. So that was a treat. I mean, obviously working with great brands, and through great brands, you meet great people. So that was incredible. And because we did have an A&P fund, and because Tucker's was very committed to quality, you know, they were, if you did something, you did it well. So, you know, doing dinners with Bollinger and Jabolet at Tetsuya's, and, you know, just being part of the 2000 Olympics, living in Sydney and having all of our principals fly in from around the world to be part of that event. You know, just incredible experiences, really, that I'll never forget. And really, Judy Hurst, God bless her soul, was my mentor, and she really took me under her wing and taught me everything I know, really, and really empowered me to start my own business.
I would think that would have been a really interesting opportunity, because it would have given you the opportunity to actually connect with, I guess, media as well as kind of trade and market.
Absolutely. I think what the experience of working for Dilataire first and then for Tucker Seabrook did for me was allowed me and gave me the opportunity to understand the channels. So I understand how on-premise works, and I understand how off-premise works. And look, I don't claim to be a salesperson. I sell stories. I'm not at the coalface, you know, treading pavements and making appointments to go and see people. But having an understanding of how the trade works and knowing some of the key players in the trade who are, you know, contacts to this day is important.
To be honest, I consider all forms of communication sales.
Yeah.
And I consider sales to be a form of communication.
Indeed.
So
I agree.
everything you do to actually improve people's, you know, understanding and perspective or perception of wine is generating sales.
Well, and it's about education, and it's about, you know, storytelling and telling the tales behind what's in the bottle. You know, the bottle can speak for itself. But that's what I learnt to do really with Tucker's was tell stories.
And what was sort of the next step after Tucker Seabrook?
After Tucker Seabrook, I came back to Melbourne. So we were living in Sydney, and I became pregnant with twins. So that was kind of interesting. So we decided that it was probably time to come home, that we might have needed a little bit of help. So we came back to Melbourne. I took 6 months maternity leave and then went back to Tucker Seabrook in a sort of part-time capacity. And it really was a shame because they just kind of didn't know what to do with me. You know, I'd had this big role in Sydney where I had 5 people on my team, et cetera, et cetera. Coming back to a part-time role, there just wasn't really space for me. They didn't quite know how to utilise my skills. It's difficult when you work part-time to get kind of traction. So I sort of, you know, messed around a bit there, and then decided that it was time. It was just time. I needed to probably develop some flexibility for myself when you've got little babies. So I started my own business from home.
Right, and that was?
And that was Fireworks PR Promotions and Events, yeah. Okay.
Now, this is probably a pretty interesting period of time as far as the wine industry in general.
Yeah.
When the concept of a PR firm probably already existed well and truly, but for wine, I would think it was probably still a somewhat new concept.
Well, kind of. Yeah,
there would have been PR agencies, I would think, that would probably work with some wine brands, but not kind of in that sort of specialising way.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. There were a few sort of lifestyle specialists, and at that time, around the same time, I mean, Angie Bradbury and Stuart Gregor had started Liquid Ideas in Melbourne, so that was very much a specialised agency. So I certainly was at that time. We were all kind of doing that. And I started actually doing some other stuff. My very first client was a naturopathic health company, because at the time when you're starting, you just go, look, I'll do anything. You know, PR skills are portable, and they are. So I did some work with a company called Martin and Pleasance, and my second client was the State Library of Victoria, which was fantastic. Cool. So I became their sponsorship and events manager for their foundation, which was the fundraising arm of that fine institution. And I was there for 4 years. So that was great to kick me off. My third client was Abercrombie and Kent, which was a luxury travel business. So I'd kind of moved away a bit from specialising in wine, and I was in Sydney once with a friend having a drink, and I met someone who looked after PR in a hotel, okay? And the travel industry is rife. There's lots of PR companies that do travel. That's a very specialised area. And she said to me, what are you good at? And I said, well, most of my experience is in wine and sort of hospitality. And she said, well, who are your clients? I said, well, I've got a travel business and I've got the State Library and I've got this. And she said, but what are you really, really good at? And I said, well, I'm kind of really good at wine, really. She said, do wine. And I thought, yeah, do wine, do what I'm good at and do what I know most about. So that was really an impetus for me to really specialise. So then I picked up some small kind of project clients. And then over time, I've had some really solid relationships with wine companies. So I've done a lot of work with Tabilk. I implemented and planned and delivered their 150th anniversary celebrations in 2010. I started working that same year with Australia's First Families of Wine, who are still a client, of course. I look after Tarrawarra from the Yarra Valley, Kirrihill from the Clare. So, and I've done loads and loads and loads of project stuff over the years with wine. So, yeah, we've very definitely become wine specialists.
Now, for those people who probably don't understand, I think everyone has obviously heard about PR or what public relations is, but what's your kind of definition, I guess, of public relations, and then how does that work as far as the wine industry is concerned?
Okay, well, public relations is really about communicating a message. So we are the coalface for our clients with the media and people who are talking about wine. Now, obviously, what's happened over the years is that the media landscape has changed very, very dramatically. So whereas it used to be a very traditional approach, obviously we've got the rise of online and bloggers and, the whole digital thing's insane. So
in the same way that markets have become more fragmented, so has the media landscape.
Well, it has, because, if you look at column centimetres are shrinking, so you are in a very competitive place to get cut through. So what that's meant from a public relations point of view and a communications point of view is that you've got to be really sharp with your message and you've actually really got to have a story to tell. There's no point, for instance, if I was working with a restaurant, which I have done some work with restaurants, sending out a media release about a new menu is not news, okay? It might be an FYI, but it's not news. So it's very important to be able to manage your clients' expectations around what is news, yeah? Because everyone thinks everything they do is news, and that's not necessarily the case. So it's become increasingly difficult to find that USP for brands, and that's why we really only work with brands that have good stories to tell, because if you're trying to manufacture something that's not authentic, it's kind of pretty transparent.
But essentially what you're doing is you're working with a client to sort of find a story, find what you want to say, and then your responsibility is to actually take that to
the market,
media, to journalists or to
whoever,
opinion leaders, in some form, in an effort to generate
some buzz, and some publicity. It really depends. Many clients, everyone's got a different objective. So the first thing is to determine what is the objective, and depending on it, might be the launch of a new product. So it might be a short-term project. Brands like, or groups like Australia's First Families of Wine, we've got a more consistent approach. So we are looking at consistent messaging across, activity across the year. Whereas if you're just launching a new range, for instance, that might be a short-term 3-month project.
Yeah.
So it depends what the objective of the project is. And it's very, very important to understand what the client is looking for and what their expectation is. We then go away and put together some ideas, some top-line thinking about how we might be able to get their message out there. It's not just about media engagement. It could be around events. It could be...
Yeah, well, because I was going to say, I guess it's important to distinguish between PR and advertising, which is where, you're basically, buying a space in which to, advertise something or talk about the brand. But there's a big component of that PR is events, because events tend to get a lot of attention.
Well, because we're in a society now that's obsessed with wine and food and experience.
Sure.
The rise of events has been enormous. The basic difference, I suppose, between PR and advertising is, yes, advertising is paid and you are in control of your message, okay? When you trust PR, you have to trust that there are no guarantees, that the strength of the message is what's going to get it across the line, the strength of the newsworthiness. And really, there's a lot of luck involved in PR. It's a lot about serendipitous timing.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if I deliver a pile of Shiraz samples to Ralph Kite Powell and he just happens to be tasting Shiraz that week, that's great. And you don't always know that. So there is an element of luck in all of that. So clients have to understand that nothing's guaranteed. But when you can generate some publicity through PR, it has a third-person endorsement, so it gives it some added credibility because you haven't paid for the message per se.
Thinking about my own wine business studies,
Yeah.
the value of that kind of third-party endorsement and that PR is considered much more than traditional advertising is. Because people are sort of so switched off to a lot of advertising and they kind of just gloss over things. They just flip the page in a magazine, or they don't really look at a billboard or something like that. Whereas if they're looking at the content of a publication or a piece on TV or online or something like that, they're already engaged with that. And so if you're having that kind of third-party endorsement, that is a much more powerful way to connect to an audience.
Well, it is. And I mean, obviously, traditionally, reviews have been great tools for salespeople to be able to take out to try and get some cut through when they're selling the products.
Have you seen a big move away from reviews and that
look,
kind of
absolutely. I mean, people are still interested in them, and obviously they still help build credential of wine. But I just think, you know, we are so overwhelmed with the amount of media that we consume. You know, if you think about the amount of things you see every day, whether it be on social media or you know, radio or TV or YouTube or however you're consuming your media online, it's pretty difficult to get cut through. It's hard. So it's got to be compelling. It's got to be a compelling story. It's got to ring some bells for someone. Or, you know, some people go down the more controversial path. It's got to be controversial to try and encourage discussion.
Sure.
And obviously the key to good messaging is that it's got to be short and sharp. And, you know, the rise of things like Twitter, particularly in wine communication, has been phenomenal because, you know, you've got 140 characters to get involved.
I remember when I was working at Shandon, and I was given the incredible responsibility of looking after the Shandon Twitter accounts.
Yep.
The person who, you know, was traditionally doing a lot of the PR for the business was kind of coaching me on how to do it. And like I'd write something and then I'd go over the 140 characters and you go, okay, have a really close look at it and work out what you need to say.
Yeah.
And cut things out that you don't need to. You don't need that word, take it out. You can shorten that word, take that out. Yeah. It was just like, wow, I'd never even kind of thought, because, you know, I'm sure people who have listened to the podcast know I'm quite a verbose person. I do tend to waffle. And if you read any of my essays from uni or high school, you know, I do kind of waffle on quite a lot. So to actually have to restrict myself in that way was really, really difficult for me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It is definitely quite an art. And, you know, my colleague, Megan Mitchell, who looks after our social media stuff, she's really good at just cutting to the chase, which is fantastic because we do look after some social media for some of our clients as well. But, you know, same with social media, I really encourage brand owners to do it themselves because their voice is always going to be the most authentic.
But yeah, that's exactly right. You know, and I think that the audience connects with that kind of authenticity.
Well, I think particularly in the Twitter space where you're talking a lot to influencers and you know, wine interested people and media and other winemakers, you know, you need to be on top of your game.
Do you find people sort of kind of switch off to, in inverted commas, PR?
I think so. I don't think...
Well, particularly like, you know, for example, wine writers?
You know, it's an interesting relationship, isn't it? Because we kind of... It is a symbiotic relationship, and yes, we do need each other. I think PR people often get a bad rap, and... there are some practitioners in our space, maybe.
I kind of blame Bill Hicks for that.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, well, there's a famous bit of stand-up he did where he said, if, you know, anyone here working in, you know, advertising or marketing, just kill yourself.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
There's good and bad practitioners in any industry, and I suppose there's some in our space who have kind of come and gone and not done us too many favours. There's a lot of media, not necessarily wine media, who really bag out PR people, but I feel sad about that. Do you know what I mean? Because we're all just doing our best, trying to make a living and do a good job for our clients. That's the bottom line. And I suppose
They still need to be provided with content.
Well, they do, and that's why I say it is a symbiotic relationship. But maybe they just don't like to feel PR'd. So I'm very judicious. We're very judicious as a business about what we send out. We don't send out things we don't believe in. We don't represent brands that we don't like or don't buy into. I don't chase up after I've sent out samples or sent out a media release. I don't ring and go, "Oh, did you get my samples? Yeah, great, thanks." What's that conversation about? Everybody's busy. So I try and be respectful of everybody's time and take them on a journey when I can. If I've got a story that I think's worthy, I'll pitch it. If I don't, I won't. If we've got an opportunity, I talk to people about, we're doing this thing at the winery. Would you like to come? Yes or no? Look, everyone's busy. Everyone's time poor. And I think you have to, respect that. But what we are very big up on is, spelling and grammar and making sure that, things are communicated well.
So I want to go back to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So GFC hits. Mm-hmm. And the market goes kind of a bit haywire.
Yeah.
And budgets kind of, I would think, change. Now, probably traditionally, maybe a larger wine business, a winery or, distributor might have had a dedicated budget in terms of salary towards PR and events. And that typically would have been one of the first things to be kind of removed as budgets were kind of slashed and people needed to kind of cut costs to try and maintain some profit margin.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of changed the landscape somewhat to allow, because I would think businesses would be able to say, well, we can't justify a full-time salary, per annum. Let's kind of engage with a PR specialist on a project basis.
Yep.
Or, have them on retainer for a fraction of the cost. Do you think that kind of did impact a little bit on the landscape?
Oh, yeah, of course. I think it certainly did because, obviously export markets were shattered and people really had to pull their belts in. We were certainly able to weather that storm because we're still here, pardon me. I suppose some clever marketers see an opportunity in a downtime to actually, increase their market share. And some people did that very well.
Haven't studies said that in fact, in times of down or in recession, that's the best time to be investing? I suppose, maybe not, in terms of money, but in terms of intelligence.
Yep.
Because when things do improve again,
you're well positioned.
Front of mind.
That's right.
For the consumer.
I think the worst thing people can do is drop the ball because then when, everything is cyclical, of course. And when things do start to rise again, if you've just dropped the ball and you haven't been consistent with your messaging or your engagement with market, you're kind of behind the eight ball again. You've got to start.
Front of mind and off the map.
Absolutely. So look, we were very lucky at that time. We started working with Tabilk in 2009 because they were working towards their 150th anniversary in 2010. So they, as a family business, made a huge investment in celebrating that milestone, and good on them because they were absolutely right dead in the middle of GFC. But they committed. We were able to really do some really strong work with Tabilk over those next few years and really put them back on the map because it had been some time since they'd done that. So, I agree. Smart marketers, stay front and centre.
How did you kind of approach that project? Were you kind of engaged to purely sort of handle the PR side of things and
no.
the story? Was it it was a 360 kind of look at let's really do everything we can to rebuild and focus on that 150th?
Absolutely. And they had a marketing director, and I'd known Tabilk for a long time because at Tucker Seabrook we used to distribute to Bilk, so I was familiar with the brand anyway. What we did is absolutely had a global look at the brand and where we could get involved, and that's where I think our knowledge of the channels, the sales channels, has been really powerful, because we were able to put together both a trade, a media and a consumer campaign around that 150th messaging. And as I said, the Purbrick family made a huge commitment to that financially, which was fantastic. So we put together some consumer type events. We did a media and a launch. We did some trade stuff and tastings. We got involved in the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival. Tibilk had never done that before. We worked very closely with the Grossi family. We drove publicity around the different sort of story angles that come out of Tibilk, and there are many, because it's it's Victoria's oldest family-owned winery, so there's plenty going on up there. I really became an extension of their team, to be honest, and John Irvine and I worked remarkably closely together to put together the plan, engage with magazines, putting together winemaker dinners, all of those stuff. So we had a very big calendar of events over the course of the year. And I was very lucky we engaged with Tourism Victoria, and we did a whole raft of events in the UK. We went over to London Wine Trade Fair. We did some trade stuff there through our distributor there. We worked with Tourism Victoria to deliver some media outcomes. So it was a phenomenal year. It was great, but it was a very comprehensive campaign.
And I would think that it would be pretty complex in terms of engaging with so many stakeholders and then so many channels, and kind of getting the investment from organisations outside of Tibilk to kind of sell in the propositions like, look, the story is Tibilk, but it's going to generate so much attention and revenue down the line for the region, Victoria, Melbourne, Australia. There's so much more to it than merely, hey, Tibilk 150.
Oh, absolutely. And it was important to illustrate that there was a very comprehensive campaign behind all of this activity. It wasn't just a one-off. We didn't just run one event. We ran a series of events. We did a very comprehensive sort of publicity campaign. We engaged with media right up front to kind of get them on board by holding a 3-day event at the winery where we looked at, Marsanne dating back to, 1955 and Shiraz back to 48, and, remarkable opportunity and definitely a one-off opportunity. So we were able to generate some really good stuff. We worked really closely with some magazine stakeholders, as I said. We work really closely with Tourism Victoria. So, again, what is PR? PR is engaging and telling that story to build relationships and build rapport and get people on board. And so that's what we did.
And I think that having a specialisation in wine and the wine industry gives you that experience and understanding of the way the market works. And there's existing relationships, not just with media or other organisations, but also with, probably wine is one of those products where the trade are much more important in terms of opinion, and focusing that message through to the end consumer than a lot of other industries. So that's where your experience would probably help a lot more, I think.
I suppose. I mean, certainly the trade are the gatekeepers, whether it's on or off premise. They have to be engaged and believe in your product. At the end,
if you just look at the big seller of wine in Australia, the two big retail companies.
Yeah.
And of course, in-house, they're doing a lot of communications, with their websites, with their catalogues, in-store, that is all helping get the message out. And so even then it's so important to make sure that the clarity of the message is so important.
Yeah, but it's also about building relationships, because in order to be given the opportunity to sell your message, you've got to build a relationship behind the scenes.
Of course.
So I think PR isn't just about engaging with media and stuff. It's about engaging with other influencers and being an advocate for the brands that you believe in, whether it be with your own networks, your own friends, whether it's via connections on, business connections on Facebook, whatever. You've got to be kind of talking the talk on behalf of your brands. That's the point. Bringing people together, cross-promotional opportunities, networking. It's not as simple as just, writing a media release. It's far, far more comprehensive than that.
One of the really exciting kind of, PR kind of concepts and stories for me in the past sort of 5 or 10 years is definitely the Australia's First Families of Wine kind of organisation, and you sort of represent that kind of loosely. How involved were you in terms of the establishment of that group?
Okay, so the group started in 2009, but it had been something that the founding kind of members, Robert Hill-Smith and Alistair Purbrick and Ross Brown really were the sort of drivers of that initiative in the first instance. They'd been working on that for some time. They'd had this idea. They put together some criteria. They went out to kind of Australia's oldest family-owned, multi-generational wine companies, which is what it's all about. And they got 12 founding members on board, which was amazing. They launched in 2009 to great fanfare in Sydney. We didn't handle the launch, most unfortunately. But however, a year down the track, the person who did handle the launch wasn't able to continue because of a conflict of interest. So we were lucky enough. I was just lucky to be in London with Tabilk at the right time. And I wrote my first media release for Australia's First Families of Wine from London. And then so a beautiful relationship has begun. And so we've worked with the guys since 2010, so for 5 years. We've seen them, that was their launch into the UK. So that was happening at the same time. So we were lucky enough to be part of that. As I said, I was there with Tabilk and just happened to be able to be part of that, which was great. We've seen them launch into the UK, launch into Canada, launch into China. So we've been able to be involved with that as a kind of conduit between people on the ground in those countries. We've also obviously done some domestic activity. We've created this Unlocked franchise, which was, very heavy duty tasting for both media and trade, and then a consumer event. We've done that in Sydney and Brisbane and in Melbourne last year. We're taking that concept to the US in May and back to Canada. So, look, I'm very, very lucky to be working with such amazing brands with incredible stories. And our business is obviously the umbrella for those 12 companies. They all have their own PR and marketing that slots in underneath that. But we're lucky to work with all of those. So, it's a real multi-stakeholder engagement, but it's terrific. And what we've really seen, and I think this was very much driven under Ross Brown's chairmanship, was the rise of the next generation of First Families, which I think is just a compelling story.
Some of whom I've actually had on the podcast.
Yeah, well, you've had Richard Birch, I know, certainly, haven't you?
Yeah, and Tom Barry.
Yeah, right, of course. So, seeing those guys come through and what they're doing, and that's just inspiring. They're great group of kids. They're very smart. They're very well educated. They've got a vision. They're the custodians of the future. And I think First Families is very much about longevity. These guys, you've got Yalumba 1849, Tabilk 1860, Tyrrell's. They've been around for a long time. They're here for the long haul. And their commitment to that next generation is very obvious, and it's fantastic.
I would think that one of the great things about working with those kind of names is that there's no cynicism around it. Like I think that it would be easy to be cynical about kind of flash in the pan types or new things like big, attention. It's like there's a lot of affection for those kind of brands. You can't begrudge them. It's like it's like.
Well, they're household names.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like, I used to love them. Of course, I'll dedicate some attention to that kind of thing. Yeah.
Look, we've still got a long way to go with First Families. We're only sort of 5 years in, and, that's, as I said, they're here for the long haul. So we're looking at a whole lot of different stuff. But they've very much been committed to a quite altruistic approach, really, about building the profile, or rebuilding the profile of quality Australian wine, particularly, well, domestically, but certainly internationally. And that was a real reaction to what was happening, particularly in the UK, where, Australian wine was sunshine in a bottle, and, it was all a bit low-key and industrial and not really having an understanding of the provenance and history and quality behind these wines, these top-end wines that these guys produce. So everything that we've done around Unlocked and that sort of unlocking the family cellars is giving people a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And what we don't do when we get those 12 principals on a panel, they don't really talk about the wine. They talk about their stories. They talk about their forebears. They talk about their iconic soil. They talk about being custodians of land. You know, they're very, very serious about that. But they're fun because they all kind of bounce off each other, and you know, they're a really compelling group when they're all together.
And are there any events coming up that you want to kind of let people know about?
Not at this stage. We're looking at we are doing a bridged unlock version in Perth this year in August. So the Birch family are very much going to drive that over there, which will be terrific. And as part of that, we do a next gen trip. So usually the next geners go and they visit each other's wineries. So we started in South Australia, we've done Victoria, we've done New South Wales. So Western Australia is the last one, which is great. So all the next geners will be heading over to Perth as well, and I'm sure Natalie and Richard Birch will look after them beautifully. So that's coming up in Perth in August. Of course, a huge investment going into launching in the US and Canada in May. So we've been working really closely with Wine Australia, who are helping to deliver that outcome, as well as some PR people for Wine Australia in the US, and we work with a company called Praxis PR in Canada, who are terrific, and they looked after the original Canadian launch. So look, we've got a heap of work to do with that, which has been terrific. You know, so that's been a lot of liaison, putting together a whole range of events in San Francisco, New York, and then in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. So yeah, that's taken up quite a lot of our time, as you can imagine. So all the guys are heading off in the middle of May.
Well, on that note, I won't hold you up because it sounds like you've got a lot of work to do. But thank you very much for making some time and being on the Vincast. What's the best way for people to find out all the info about Fireworks PR and follow you on as far as social media?
Okay, so we're on Facebook at Fireworks PR Promotions and Events, Twitter at Fireworks PR, Instagram at Fireworks PR. There's a theme developing here, Joan. Kathy Lane, we're around. Website is www.fireworkspr.com.au. So we're there. LinkedIn, you know, we're everywhere.
Definitely get in touch and keep an eye out for any of those events that Kathy was talking about. But again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great.
And as always, thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, also known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can follow me on social media on Instagram and Twitter. I'm at Intrepid Wino, and you can also follow the podcast at the Vincast to find out as soon as a new episode is available. If you come to Facebook, you can find me there on facebook.com/Intrepid Wino. But definitely come to intrepidwino.com, where you will find every single episode of the podcast, as well as various writings that I've done in the past in my travels, tastings, musings, interviews, that kind of thing. Please come and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or Player FM, and that way you'll be able to download the episode as soon as it becomes available. And if you do subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms, please do give me a rating. A review would be fantastic. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And also, it would be great if you could share the podcast with your friends, family, anyone who is interested in wine just like you. I look forward to next week's episode. Don't forget to get in touch with me if you would like to be part of the 50th episode recording. But until next time, bye.